to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a sick and twisted experimental story involving animal experiments and human experiments. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this twist and different type of a story. Please, of course, do let me know what you thought down below in the comments, guys. Of course, please do like and share. And without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Animal Experiment, Part 1. Let's get straight into that. When I woke up, I was thirsty, incredibly so. My mouth felt dry and parched, as if I hadn't had water in days. My head throbbed with a dull pain. I was laying on a cold, hard floor. I tried to prop myself up, but my arms shook and gave way, as though too weak to properly support me. Breathing hard, I waited for my vision to focus on the room around me. It was dark, lit only by a single naked light bulb overhead, and constructed entirely of flat, grey concrete. There were no windows. It was only a metal door at the far end of the room. I tried to remember where I was, or how I'd gotten here, but my memory was a complete blank. I felt panic bubble in my chest, and I tried to stifle it as best as I could. Closing my eyes, I forced my breath into a slow rhythm, in through my nose, out through my mouth. I rolled over onto my belly and tried to stand. I was about halfway off the ground before my shaking legs buckled and I collapsed to the floor again. There was no feeling in them, none at all. Looking down at myself, I found that I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. Below the shorts, blood-stained bandages wrapped my legs up to my knees. My hands, also numb, were wrapped in bandages as well. My fingers protruded from them like bloody sausages. Around my throat was a metal collar which connected to a small pole by chain. This time, panic did get to me and crushed my lungs and welled in my throat like years of restrained tears. "Oh my God!" I screamed. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" There was no response. My words echoed in a dark room, but there was no sound from outside. "Help!" I shrieked again with wild panic. "Help me, somebody, please!" I screamed for help until it became too painful and my voice grew hoarse. Eventually, I dissolved into tears, crying through fingers which were devoid of all feeling. I racked my brain for memory, desperately trying to remember anything about how I'd gotten here, about my life. But my thoughts were thick and cloudy. My memory, if I had any left, felt distant and unreachable. Now, there was only static. The room was cold, and I was thirsty, hungry, weak. There was simply no strength to fight my way out of this. I sat there, in the dark, forcing myself to think straight and search for a way to escape. The ground was mottled and damp. There was a puddle beside me, and in it I could see a swimming reflection of myself. I was female, probably in my mid-20s. My hair was thick, cropped at the shoulders, and a deep chocolate colour. It looked like I'd been wearing makeup, but all that was left was a smudge of lipstick and trails of mascara. I laid on the ground and began to cry again. It escaped me in hitching sobs. At some point the metal door opened. I summoned enough fear-driven strength to prop myself up and watched as an old man entered the room. He had white hair and a white beard and wore glasses. He was dressed in a formal way. An argyle sweater vest stretched tight around his overweight middle, and below that were slacks and dress shoes. Wordlessly, the man locked the door and hobbled toward me on a cane. Dipping with every step, he walked with a severe limp. "Please," I begged, my voice a whisper, "don't hurt me. I don't know where I am, but please, don't hurt me. Just let me go." and I'll never come back. I won't tell the police anything, I swear. Just please, let me go, don't hurt me. I'm not gonna hurt you, said the man. He nodded to my legs. You were in an accident, a plane crash. He drew up a chair from one corner of the room and took a seat in front of me. Only then did I notice he was holding a bowl of water. A plane crash? Yes, you were the only survivor. But unfortunately your legs and hands were damaged beyond repair. You won't be able to use them again. A sigh escaped my trembling lips. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Who are you? Ah, the man scoffed. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How could I be so rude? My apologies. I'm Dr. Benjamin Ma. He extended a hand. He must have realized his mistake because he quickly withdrew it and said, My associates and I rescued you from wreckage. We've deadened your injuries so that you won't feel any pain. For now, that is. I suspect it will return shortly. He was right. My legs were already starting to hurt, like there was fire burning inside of them. Dr. Ma set the water bowl on the ground and slid it towards me. Drink up. You must be very thirsty. Why can't I remember anything? I whimpered. Tears were leaking down my cheeks again. Why am I chained up? Where am I? You're in hospital. Not the best, admittedly, but it's all we have for now. You can't remember anything because you've suffered a traumatic head injury, and the damage needs time to heal. When you are well, you will be let go. Until then, I'm afraid it's simply too dangerous for you to go waltzing around out in the cold. Dr. Ma felt his pants pocket, then reached inside. Ah, I almost forgot. Little something for you to eat. He withdrew a crumpled napkin. From it, he unfolded a steak and handed it to me. I clasped it between my bandaged hands and began to bite into it. The steak wasn't warm, wasn't even cooked all the way. It was barely medium rare, but I was so hungry that it didn't really matter. I've laced it with a few painkillers, said Dr. Ma. Don't worry, nothing too potent, but it should keep your pain down to a minimum. When I looked up, he was already hobbling to the door. I'll keep an eye on you from what the security cameras over in the corner. If you need more medicine, just wave to the camera and I'll be down as soon as I can. He was halfway out the door. Wait, I said. He stopped to look at me. I met his gaze. Suddenly, a loss for words. Can I at least get a bed? I finally stammered. He stared at me, and his eyes seemed to flash with hatred. It only lasted a moment, however. Then, it was gone. I'll see what I can do. And then, I was alone. I ate the steak entirely. I had no reason to trust Dr. Ma. He could have poisoned it, for all I knew. But my alternative was simply to starve. I drank the water too. I had to hold the bowl with my injured hands, but after a few gulps I felt immensely better. To put it simply, I did these things because I had to. No, I didn't trust Dr. Ma because of one thing I was completely certain. There had been no fucking plane crash. I had no recollection of my life before this place, but the plane crash story stuck on an unusual nerve. There are some things you just know in your gut, by instinct, and I knew there had been no plane crash. Dr. Ma was right about one thing. There was a security camera fixed in the corner of the room near the ceiling. It watched me like a small black eye, never moving, always present. There was a tiny red light on it. I waited for the light to go out, but it never did. The room was cold and damp. I was shivering through this. Might have been from fear or pain. The pain relievers in the state began to wear off, and a few hours after I'd eaten it, now both my legs were on fire. My hands felt like they had been smashed with a hammer. Maybe they had. I knew there was no way out unless I forced my body back into submission. He said I would only be able to use my legs again. But was that the truth? The only way I'd find out would be to try and use them. I tried to stand. I pressed my hands against the floor and shifted my legs underneath me, then put all my might into commanding them to work, and they did. Slowly, but surely, I lifted off the ground on legs like jelly. They wobbled violently back and forth, and suddenly the pain became so intense, so excruciating, that my knees buckled and I crashed to the floor, panting for breath. Damn it! I tried again, this time using the chair as a crutch, but everything from the knees down shrieked for me to stop. Tears came out of my eyes like waterfalls, and every muscle in my body went rigid. I bit down on my lips so hard that it drew blood. There was an audible crack, and white, hot agony surged through my legs in a sensation I would spend years trying to forget. I fell to the ground, and a deafening scream escaped me with knife-like finesse. I spent that night on the ground with my head in a puddle of freezing water and my legs breaking apart like glass, scared to even move. I waved at the camera, but Dr. Ma didn't return until morning. I knew it was morning because Dr. Ma told me when he came inside. He said, "Good morning, I trust you had a good sleep." With him was a small, stained mattress. He laid it down next to me and dusted his hands off. I said, "Let me go, I want out of here." Dr. Ma straightened to his full height. No. He peered down at me with a stern, unpitied look. "I am under strict orders to keep you here until you are." "Then fuck your orders," I cried. I leapt forward on all fours, reaching out to attack him with all the strength I had left, but my chain went taut and the metal collar choked me, my fingers waving mere inches from Dr. Ma's legs. The man didn't even flinch. He simply raised his cane and struck me hard across the face with it. I went reeling to the ground, gasping for air, a red, hot mark growing on my cheek. "You," said Dr. Ma, "have been a bad girl." He produced another steak and set it on the ground for me. Then he picked up my water bowl. "I'm going to refill this," he said. "For your sake, don't try anything while I'm gone." He left the room and closed the door behind him. I spat towards it and listened. There was the distinct click of keys turning in a lock. Even if I managed to escape my chain, I was locked in this room. Hatred boiled inside me for Dr. Ma. I would find a way out of this, I swore, but at the moment I was too hungry. I needed to regain my strength and my legs. My legs were in agony. I greedily devoured the steak, hardly noticing that it was even less cooked than yesterday. Completely rare on the inside, purplish pink, cold, and barely cooked at all. I didn't care. The meat was tender and abundantly juicy. Even when it was gone, I licked my hands and my lips, the ground where it had been, anything to keep the taste of meat in my mouth. Not long afterward, the pain in my hands and legs began to diminish. Dr. Ma returned with my water bowl and slid it in front of me, some of it sloshing mercilessly to the ground. "That should last you till tomorrow. Until then, try to get some rest." "What's my name?" I said. Dr. Ma eyed me inquisitively. After a moment he said, "I don't know." "I was in a plane crash, right? Surely I had some kind of ID on me, a wallet, a phone, a passport." "Nothing," said Dr. Ma. He turned and limped towards the door. "You aren't thinking clearly. Your mind needs time to heal, so try to get some rest. I must go check the others." "What's my name?" I cried, but he was gone. "Just tell me my fucking name!" The next few days, or weeks, or however long I was there, passed in slow agony. I determined that Dr. Ma came by once a day with a steak and water, but after the 6th or 7th day I became confused and eventually gave up. No one was going to rescue me. No one knew I was here. Someone else had been trying to keep count before me, however, with prolonged success. On my 3rd day in the room, I noticed scratch marks on the concrete wall behind me. They were thin and precise. Upon closer inspection, I realized they were tally marks, multiple sets of 4 with the 5th mark slashed through them. Whoever they were, they had been here no less than 53 days. After that, the scratches on the wall became illegibly chaotic. The steaks Dr. Ma brought me on each morning became increasingly raw. They went from rare, pinkish chunks of meat to bright red slabs that were not cooked at all. They weren't seasoned or salted. It was just meat. Maybe in the past life it would have bothered me, but not now. It was the highlight of my day. The only thing I looked forward to was the time Dr. Ma brought me my meat. Maybe I was just starving, but I thought I was becoming conditioned to enjoy it. I was certain painkillers weren't the only drug I was being fed. there was something else, something that made my thoughts slow and deranged, something that made me crave the meat more and more. At night I slept on the mattress, though sleep came with broken irregularity. When I was asleep, dreams of succulent bloody meat came to me in taunting waves. Then I would awaken to the sounds from outside my room, sounds that were almost human, but not quite. Dr. Ma had mentioned there were others like me. Maybe it was the thoughts that kept me sane, that I wasn't alone. During the day, I walked on my hands and knees, trying to pump life back into them. It was painful, but I thought that with exercise they might heal enough to work properly. Over several days, though, I was showing no sign of progress. The pain continued to get worse, and the meat continued to soothe it. I complained to Dr. Ma that my injuries could be developing infection, but he simply told me to keep eating the steaks and allow them to ease the pain. I hated Dr. Ma. Maybe it was the medicine talking, but I thought that without the chain, I might be able to take him down. Maybe kill him. I was weak, but so was he. One bad leg and 50 more years or so made him fragile too. Yes, he would go down quickly. His flesh would be easy to tear apart. But Dr. Ma was too smart. He never came within radius of my chain. He was always just slightly out of reach. I waited patiently for the day when he would come a tad too close and seize my moment, but it never came. I must have been there at least 2 or 3 weeks before I got some truth out of him. He fed me my bloody steak as usual and sat down in the chair with both hands folded on his cane. It's about time we had a chat. I've been very busy over the past few days, but I'm sure you have many questions, so I'll allow you only 3. Choose them wisely. I licked the blood off my lips, trying to cherry-pick only 3 questions from the swarm in my head. At last, I said, "You're not a real doctor, are you?" Dr. Ma breathed out through his nose. A smile pricked the edges of his lips. "No, at least not officially, but in practice, I'm nothing less." Even though I had suspected exactly this since I arrived, hearing him say it like this made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt a chill run down my spine and tried to think of my next question. "Make haste, my girl. The clock is ticking." "Just give me a second," I heard myself scream. Then, "Will you ever let me go?" Dr. Ma leaned back in his chair. He held the cane at his side, as though it were a sword in his sheath. "No, I'm afraid not. From now on, you are my property. Like my cane, or this place, I own you." I guess I should have been afraid, but at this my hatred for Dr. Ma heightened immensely. That was the point at which I became determined to kill him the first chance I got. "Last question," said Dr. Ma, his smile a distant memory. "Make it count. What are you going to do to me?" At this, Dr. Ma stood and hobbled away from me. I thought he would leave, but instead he stopped by the wall with his back to me. "Not what I'm going to do to you, young lady. What am I doing to you?" He turned to face me. "You see, I have a very unusual theory. The theory that every human thought, emotion, and perception can be reverted to a single basic instinct. That each and every one of us, at our core, is simply trying to survive. And that, with some mild conditioning, every moral and every learned behaviour can be undone." He snapped his fingers and I jumped, just like that. "You didn't answer my question," I snarled. "That's not fair. What are you going to do to me?" "I'm afraid I did answer your question. I'm sure if you think of it long enough, you will come to realise what it means." He limped towards the door and stopped. "I think you are ready for your first trial. Yes, tomorrow we will begin." That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I raised my middle finger to the sky and kept shouting for the camera to go fuck itself. When Dr. Ma came by the next morning, he didn't bring a steak. Instead, he presented me with a small box and slid it within my reach. "What's this?" I asked. "Breakfast." I took the lid off. Inside was a small mouse, alive. He snuffled along the edge of the box, clearly shaken by the movement. I looked up at Dr. Ma, my mouth agape. "No," I said. "No, you don't mean eat the mouse." "You're a psychopath," I blurted. "I won't. I could never do that." "Then you," said Dr. Ma, standing to leave, "will simply have to starve." "This is a test, isn't it?" I said. "Yesterday you mentioned a trial. This is a test to see if I'll actually do it." Dr. Ma said no more. He left me and the mouse alone, locking the door behind him. I cupped my hands beneath the creature, lifted him out of the box, and set him on the mattress next to me. No, there was no way I would do it. Part of me wanted to believe that I would pass Dr. Ma's test by abstaining from it. But maybe I'd pass the test by following through. It didn't matter either way, I was going to do it. Looking at the mouse, I found that I couldn't even think about it. The next day, Dr. Ma would return with more meat and tell me that I had either passed or failed his test. And after that, I wasn't sure. I spent that night curled up on my mattress, hugging the mouse to my chest. The temperature dropped dramatically at night, and I always struggled to stay warm. With this creature, I could protect. It was the first night I didn't feel completely alone. This mouse and I were in the same boat. It was the only living thing which I felt I had a connection. I felt as though I had a friend, and I named him Roger. I wasn't sure where the name came from. It simply bubbled to my mind from a memory long forgotten, but it seemed to fit. The next morning, Dr. Ma didn't bring me steak. In fact, he didn't come at all. I suddenly remembered that he'd said about starving. But surely that had been a bluff. He needed me to test his theory. He wouldn't just allow me to die. Then again, he had no shortage of hostages to try it on. He probably had. And if my life was disposable, I was in danger. How many others had eaten the mouse? My stomach growled, and I suddenly became aware of how hungry I was. I had been conditioned to expect meat at this time every day, and now there was none. My eyes fitted to Roger, who was exploring the other side of the room, far out of my reach. I felt a fleeting temptation, and then it was gone. Whatever had just come over me, I didn't like it. I scolded myself for even considering it, because I knew it was exactly what Dr. Ma wanted. When Roger scuttled back over to me, I picked him up and hugged him tight. I told him I would never hurt him. We spent the rest of the day on the mattress. I was too exhausted to exercise my limbs like I used to, and without the painkillers my legs and hands hurt too much to use. I talked to Roger, told him what was on my mind. He couldn't respond, but I like to think that he could. Over time, the little mouse seemed to develop a personality. At night, I confessed my darkest fears to him, and had a lot of those. I woke up during what I assumed to be night, absolutely mad with hunger. The steaks had never provided me enough sustenance, but they had kept me motivated, one day at a time. Now, there was a deep-rooted pain gnawing at my stomach, shriveling my insides like a lifelong addict. I was craving meat. Roger was fast asleep next to me, his little chest heaving rapid breaths. Looking at him, I felt the same familiar temptation wash over me. If I killed Roger, it would be fast. He wouldn't even feel it. And if I didn't, I would die in here. Dr. Ma would avoid my room until only my rotting corpse remained. Saliva pooled in my mouth and escaped my lips in thick strands. Here was Roger, totally vulnerable, asleep, unable to defend himself. Roger wouldn't understand. But he knew all my fears and all my secrets. He would want me to feed. I bit down on my thumb hard. Pain surged down my wrist, but I held the bite until my sensation passed. Shame and hatred flooded me in its place. I laid down and tried to get back to sleep, but sleep was slow to come. I really needed some painkillers. When I woke up, I was certain Dr. Ma should have come by again, but of course, he hadn't. I looked down at Roger, but he wasn't breathing. He simply laid there on the mattress, unmoving. Roger? I prodded his little body with my hands, a sick panic rising in my throat. Roger, wake up! He just laid there, like a statue, lifeless. He must have died at some point after I fell asleep. I felt tears sting my eyes and roll down my cheek. My throat started to burn. "Wake up!" I shrieked. "Wake up! Wake up!" I couldn't believe it. I couldn't bear it. Roger was my only friend, the only thing to keep me company in all of this. I shook his little body until I was sure he wasn't going to wake up, then shook him even more. I squeezed him crushingly tight. My sadness turned to fiery anger. How could he leave me like this? How? Roger, lifeless body, lolled in my hands, and I hugged him tight to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. I must have been like that for hours, hunched forward, weeping, until my mattress became damp with tears. At last, my stomach growled, and the temptation washed over me for a final time. Roger was gone. All that was left was an empty shell of my friend, a sack of meat that was no different than the steaks I had been eating. I wiped my tears and held him close to my face by his towel. He didn't struggle. He didn't move. He simply hung there. I put his neck between my teeth and started to bite down, testing him. His body was soft and furry, but beneath that, it was hard. I bit down harder and felt something snap between my teeth. Warm blood filled my mouth with salty delight, and I kept chewing, feeding his body into my mouth bit by bit, cracking and snapping and breaking him apart. He was furry on the outside, but inside there was so much flesh, so much stingy, raw meat. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't feel in control of my actions. I didn't feel even human. Every rib, every vertebra cracked with disappointing ease, and I tore chunks from the body with my teeth, swallowing them whole, becoming more and more inhuman with each passing bite. His towel was the last to go. It was chewy and flavourless, and when it was gone, the sensation left me. Suddenly, I was alone again, with Roger's blood and Roger's innards spattered across my mouth and chin. It covered my hands and my lap and stained the mattress below. My hunger had subsided ever so slightly, but now I was sick with a deep, irreversible shame. Tears brimmed my eyes again, and quietly I began to cry. Dr. Marr opened the door only moments later, as if he'd been patiently waiting for my breaking point. When he did, I was at the end of my chain, spitting and cursing and reaching towards him with blood-stained hands. "You did this to me!" I shouted, choking myself against the metal collar. "You did this to me, you son of a bitch!" The bastard actually smiled, his lips peeling back to reveal coffee-stained grill. "No, my dear, you did this to yourself. I've only fed you and given you water and provided you medicine. Your actions are not mine to dictate. You've been a very good girl, and for that you will be rewarded." He tossed me a bloody steak, the first in 2 days, and I dove for it, no longer bothering with my hands but eating it wholly with my teeth. "You've passed your first trial," said Dr. Marr, watching me over his spectacles. "I think you're ready for the second. I think you're ready for the fighting room." I didn't like the sound of that. If it was Dr. Marr I had to fight, however, I felt the odds were much in my favour. Not only did I believe I could do it, I wanted to do it. I would relish it the way I'd relished the mouse. It would be all too easy. I finished the last of the steak, lapping its pool of juice from the floor. There was more of a medicinal aftertaste than I remembered, but I had been in such a frenzy that I hardly noticed it until it was gone. I wondered why Dr. Marr wasn't leaving until my vision began to blur and my head grew light. I felt ill. "Well, what did you put?" was all I managed before I collapsed to the floor, exhausted, my breath coming in rapid intervals. The last thing I saw was Dr. Marr's blurry face leaning over me, silhouetted by the ceiling light. He actually reached down to stroke my hair, and every fibre of my being burned to tear him in half. But I was paralysed. "It's okay, my dear. It's okay. Your time to die is not just yet." When I woke up, I was moving down a hallway. The place was dark, but when my vision focused, I became aware that I was bound to a wheelchair by buckled straps. I tried to shake my head back into consciousness, struggling against my restraints. From behind me, I heard Dr. Mar's voice. "Ah, I see you're awake. Just in time to see my latest work." The hall smelled terrible, like death and decay and defecation, all mingled into a single pungent concoction. There were sounds here, too. The same inhuman cries I had heard some nights in half-awakened nightmares, unsure of what was real and what was not. There was grunting and moaning and barking, not animal sounds at all, but terrifically human ones, all crescending like a chorus from hell. On my left and right were prison cells, rooms from which were separated by only metal bars, and beyond the bars were things that had once been people but could no longer be called that, for surely there was nothing human about them. I saw a woman with a cat ears stapled to her head and eyes which had only been gouged away, a man whose arms and legs had been severed at the joints so that he walked along on bleeding stumps, a pig snout sewn to his face. Another woman, this one with a beak stapled to her mouth and arms which connected to her hips by flaps of skin. I saw an old man with a neck 3 feet long, his extended tongue coiling on the ground. I saw a thing with 7 arms sewn from the ribs to the waist. I saw a male and a female, their legs broken to resemble those of a digitigrade, their lips pulled wide to display moors of sharpened teeth. I saw a group of aquatics, a man with no arms and a shark fin sewn onto his back, a woman whose legs had been amputated and replaced with 8 more legs that were not her own. I saw a different man in a different room, screaming while his cellmates ate him alive. I saw people with scales, others with feathers, and others with fur. I saw human bodies with the heads of wolves which moved miraculously on their own accord. They bled and they drawled and they howled as we passed, some reaching at me from the bars, some cowering in the shadows. They gnashed and chomped, scratched and screamed, ripped flesh from the carcasses of their fallen own. But worst of all, by far the worst, was their lack of humanity, a trait which, like their limbs and flesh, had been robbed from them so irreversibly. There was not a plea for help, there was not a cry of pain or a curse. There was not a soul to utter such intelligence. "Oh my God!" I heard myself scream, the voice reaching me from 1,000 miles away. Was this what I was to become? A lifeless monster, driven solely by hunger and lust and instinct, a memory of a human being with a mind drugged and tortured beyond all recognition. At last we passed the cells and Dr. Marr wheeled me to a stop by a door on the right. He produced a ring of keys from his pocket and inserted one into the lock. "This," said Dr. Marr, "is the fighting room." He pushed the door wide and wheeled me through inside. The place was massive and empty, like my cell. It was made of concrete dead centre. Almost as big as the room itself was a metal dome constructed mainly steel, and it was like a bird cage. At the far end of the cage was something lying on the ground. At first, I thought it was a corpse. Then it began to stir. "Rosie, I've brought you a meal," called Dr. Marr. Then the creature on the ground turned to look at us, and I suddenly wished it hadn't. I saw that it had been, a young woman around my age, with white blonde hair and her face bruised and scarred to hideousness. Her teeth had been sharpened into spikes, claws had been sewed to the ends of her fingers. Her eyes were red and glazed, and she slobbered onto the ground like a wild animal. She wore no clothes aside from a collar and her bandages that wrapped her hands and shins like mine and forced her to walk on all fours. Her skin was pale and her figure so gaunt that I could see each and every rib. Her mouth was slathered in blood. She had been eating something on the ground. "Rosie is my most recent project," explained Dr. Marr. "She may not be as flashy as the others, but so far she has been less resistant to the test than you have. Her mind was malleable and easy to bend. She can no longer use reason like you or me. Her thoughts operate on a more primal level. To my horror, Dr. Marr used another key to unlock the cage door and unbuckled me from the wheelchair. He tipped me forward and I fell without protest, too dazed from a sedative which had yet to wear off. I forced myself into action, scrambling around to attack, but the door latched with a loud clang and I was trapped inside. My fingers curled around the bars and I shook them to no avail. "Let me go!" I screamed. "Open the door, damn it! Open the fucking door!" "You will be let go," said Dr. Marr, already limping away, "when one of you is dead." Those were his last words before the door to the hallway closed with a final echo. Slowly, I turned to face my roommate. She just stood there on all fours, watching me, a low growl sounding from her throat. "Please," I begged, "don't hurt me. I don't know if you can hear me, but Rosie, please, if you can hear me, we can work together and get out of here." I could tell my words weren't getting through. She was moving slowly towards me, each step a small clack as her claws wrapped the ground. The growling intensified. I scooted backward until my back was pressed against the cage and I couldn't move any further. Rosie bowed her head, bloody saliva leaking out of her mouth, her pink eyes half shut and trained on me. Then her mutilated jaw unhinged and she flew at me with a shriek of bloodlust. In a defensive panic, I threw out my hands and felt teeth like spine sink deep into my forearm. I screamed in rage and pain, wincing my eyes shut tight as this monster clamped to the bone, spitting blood across both of us. In that moment, something inside me awoke, perhaps the same primitive evil that drove the creature before me. It started in my chest and surged through my blood, a sudden adrenaline boost that filled my mind with crimson aggression. I grabbed Rosie's coarse hair with a free hand and tugged as hard as I could, freeing her teeth from my arm long enough to pull away. Then I struck her face with a mustered force and she fell back, hissing and spitting blood. "You like that?" I said, holding an arm dotted with teeth marks. "You like that, bitch?" Rosie screamed and retaliated, this time swiping a hand, trailing her claws down my face. I kicked off with my injured legs and threw all my weight into her, sending us both sprawling to the ground. We rolled in a fury of chaos, swiping, scratching, biting, kicking. My stomach and arms were loud with pain as her claws tore relentlessly into them. I was able to snag and bite where her neck met her shoulders, at a muscle called the trapezius. Rosie's warm, rich blood met my tongue and great sensation overcame me. The same sensation I felt while eating Roger. My teeth sank harder into her, willing more and more blood into my mouth, chewing into her flesh. Rosie's hideous voice howled in my ears and she shoved me violently away. In her pain she tried to escape, writhing on her belly like a wounded animal, but I felt no urge to stop. I chased her through a pool of our own blood, reaching for her collar and snagged it from behind. She choked herself against it and I yanked it back, dragging her skeletal figure towards the cage. I fell back against it, pulling Rosie's collar with a merciless determination as she gagged and gasped and bled, her teeth gnashing, her eyes rolling. For a while, the room was filled only with the reverberating sounds of our breath, hers wheezing and mine panting, until, at last, hers stopped completely. I let go of her collar and she went limp to the floor. I knew she wasn't dead, merely unconscious for the time being, and I had to act quickly. One of Rosie's claws had been torn from her fingertips, and I clambered towards it on all fours, then inserted it into the keyhole of the cage door, my intention to pick the lock. I wiggled the claw furiously back and forth, shifting the pins one by one. Across the cage, Rosie stirred uncomfortably in her sleep and drew hitching breaths through her damaged neck. I worked faster and harder, my sweat running, my wounds bleeding. The claw got stuck and I worked it free, then heard a click as it pushed past the final pin. Rosie's eyes snapped open and she leapt towards me with a violent speed. I threw myself at the cage door and it swung open. Then I spun around and slammed the door with all my might against her face. Rosie fought the bars, howling and drooling, but the door had latched shut again. I fell back, exhausted. I wasn't sure how long I was there, only that it seemed to be swimming in and out of consciousness. Every part of me was dripping in blood, some my own, some not. Eventually, I awoke from the haze, and my severity of the situation dawned on me. Using my arms, I dragged myself to the empty wheelchair and heaved myself into it. The hallway seemed to stretch into the distance, growing narrower and longer as I rolled the wheels of the chair. I was bleeding, a complete mess. My clothes were torn, my face was scratched, my body was clawed to shreds. I was having trouble staying conscious. Still, I pressed forward, drawing my hands back and rolling the wheels, rolling the wheels, rolling the wheels. From both sides of me, the creatures cried and hissed, occasionally reaching out in hopes to draw me in. I refused to look at them, but their sounds filled my mind's eye with imaginative horrors which danced and played in the shadows of the dark. Their chains rattled, their voices called, their bodies slinked along beside me. I wasn't sure of the way out. All I knew was that I had to keep going forward. At last, I passed the cells in the room in which I had been kept. On the left was a new door, and one which was slightly ajar. I rolled myself to a slow stop, listening, but it was quiet. There was a light from inside. It shone across the hall floor in a thin band, promising hope of escape. Oh, please, God, please. Reluctantly, I rolled myself through. The room beyond was smaller than the room I had been kept in. In here, the light was cold and bright, far brighter than the rest of the place. I shielded my eyes against it, and when they adjusted, I saw that the room was immaculately white, like a doctor's office. All around the room were cages containing animals, some dead, some alive, some halfway in between. There were counters and cabinets overflowing with beakers, vials, bags of blood, scalpels, medicines and various medical instruments. In the centre of the room was a blinding light which hung low over a surgical table. Strapped to the table was a man, unconscious, with his torso wide open and both hands missing. Inspecting the man was Dr. Ma, clothed in surgeon's attire, doubled over the body and sewing it shut. He looked up when I entered, and our eyes met. For the first time, I thought I saw fear flash in them. "Oh, hello," he said, straightening up. He pulled down his surgical mask with a gloved hand. "My, you look awful. How did you get out of your cage?" When I didn't answer, he said, "Congratulations, you must have passed your second test. I'll admit, I'm a bit shocked. My bet was on Rosie." He waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, nevertheless, you've made it to the third, and this is it, my dear, surgery." I didn't attack. I didn't scream. I didn't turn to flee. Instead, I sat in the wheelchair and watched as Dr. Ma filled a syringe with a strange yellow liquid. When it was full, he flicked the tube to rid it of bubbles. You see, every theory is only a theory until it can be proven. My work, while less orthodox, is no different. The people you see out there, they are free. Their minds have been liberated from the turmoil of human life. They live in a simpler world, a better world. I'm sure you have tasted it too. Oh yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He was advancing towards me, ever so slowly, with the syringe. As he did, I sat unmoving in my wheelchair as that familiar feeling washed over me. My mind seemed to drift away, along with my cares and my fears and my pain. I was exhausted, but more importantly, I longed for meat. I craved it. I dreamed of its juicy texture and flavour. Dr. Ma became more than a person to me. He became an animal too. And how right he was. How very right. "My girl, what have I done to you is a blessing. I have allowed you to transcend your humanity here. There are no morals to which you must conform. You are driven by instinct, by desire. There is no right and no wrong. These trials have helped you to overcome them. You enjoy this. I can see it in your eyes. You have done this to yourself, and for that I am so very proud. The final transformation is a physical one, and that I can provide." He was kneeling in front of me now, our eyes level. He leaned forward, feeling my neck for a proper injection site. "Don't worry, you only feel a slight pinch, and then, when you wake up," the needle moved towards my flesh, "you will be a new creation. It was the smell of his gloves that got me, not the latex, the blood. My mouth snapped around his wrist in a death grip, and I felt my teeth go through his skin. The syringe fell to the ground, but I took no notice and had no care. My prey was in my jaws, and I was starving. Dr. Ma let out a surprised shriek. He shook his arm, but I refused to let go. Finally, he tore his arm away, leaving bits of delicious wrist in my mouth. He stumbled clumsily through a medical trays and landed against the counter, his arm spouting blood. I slid from my wheelchair and got onto my hands and knees, watching his injury with great delight. It made my mouth foam and drool. I wanted that blood, and here he was, wasting it. I slowly advanced on him, commanding my damaged limbs to work against the agony. "No," said Dr. Ma, "please no, stay back." I crawled towards him until the temptation was no longer bearable. Then I leapt upward and sank my teeth deep into his neck. Warm saltiness flooded into my mouth and down my throat. The two of us sank to the floor as he gasped and spluttered, his arms flaying weakly in defence. I was no longer holding back. I tore his throat apart with my teeth and fingernails, chewing through tendons and sinew, lapping his blood. His skin was old and dry, which made it tear easy. His tissue was weak. Dr. Ma was still alive for a few torturous moments. Then he stopped moving, his glassy eyes wide and fixated on the ceiling. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. I had gone wildly insane. I tore his clothes off and moved to his body, shredding his abdomen and chewing the insides. His intestines were thick and chewy, but his liver was tender. I broke his brittle ribs and removed his lungs and heart. The heart was juicy and bleeding and savoury. His stomach was purple and tasted of past meals that were now mine. It was the first time I'd been able to eat without restraint. I feasted until Dr. Ma's body was a jagged cavity of splintered bones and torn innards. After a long time, I had my fill. I collapsed to the floor and fell into a deep sleep, one in which I dreamed of raw steak. When I woke up, I felt sick to my core. My mind ran blank as to what had happened. Even when I saw the body, the memory returned to me in only nightmarish glimpses of a subhuman trance. The taste of blood that was once something beautiful now made me unbearably nauseous. I wanted to vomit, and I did, all over the tiled floor, choking out gallons of blood and tissue. I felt terrible, but I had my mind again, and this terrible existence was over. Logic swam back into my head, little by little, and I scrambled to Dr. Ma's body. The ring of keys was hung on a belt loop. I ripped it away and tried to stand. I grabbed hold of a counter and dragged myself upwards, slowly unbending my knees. They shook violently and my legs were on fire, but with the aid of a crutch, they supported me. I bit my lip against the pain and tears and shuffled one foot in front of the other, stumbling in microscopic increments towards the door. The hall was as dark as ever, but at the far end I could make out a staircase, one I hadn't noticed before. I felt along the cold wall, using it for support, forcing my legs to operate. I could hear the monsters of the dark ahead of me. At the first cell I tried the keys until one fit. There was a click and the door swung open with a metallic groan. The creature inside stepped towards me, the man with his limbs cut off, and moved slowly past me down the hall towards the stairs. One by one I went to the cells, trying the locks and turning the keys. One by one the doors opened and the creatures got their chance at escape. Some were too frightened or insane or mutilated to leave, but most fled their filthy prison, taking no notice of me. I was no longer afraid of them because I had become one of them, and they sensed it too. At last I had opened each door and stumbled for the stairs. At the top was a door, wide open, spilling warm light down onto me. With careful precision I lifted my feet and took the steps at the snail pace, grasping for dear life onto the railing. When I made it to the top I saw that I was at a house, a mansion. Really, it was huge and ornate, beautiful. I had spent the past several weeks in the basement. For the first time I was above surface. Pure air hit my face like ocean mist, purer than I had ever imagined it could be. The windows were black. It was night, and I staggered through the house, holding onto the walls and bookshelves, until I reached the front door. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I heard the small click of the doorknob. I was free. Frigid night air burst into the house and I stepped into it. It was dark, but by the glow of the house and the moonlight, I saw that this was a remote country. The land was surrounded on all sides by forest. Directly ahead was a groomed yard until it was broken by a road. After that was a wall of trees, through which I could see only blackness. I headed for the road, but as I walked, fatigue began to overtake me. My vision swam in and out of focus and my head felt light as a feather. My legs growing weak, and before long I collapsed right at the edge of the road. Maybe I was just falling asleep again, dipping above and below the surface of consciousness, but whether it was a dream or an echo from the distance, I thought I heard the cries of human monsters escaping into the forest. Days later, I learned that I had been found by someone heading into town. They said I was covered in blood from head to toe, and they immediately called the police. It didn't take them long to identify me as redacted, a 25-year-old woman who had been missing for nearly 3 weeks. I had last been seen at my day job, but even my co-workers suspected I'd been abducted long after I left the day. There was no plane crash. Slowly but steadily, my memory returned to me as I stayed in hospital. My friends and family visited me, but at first I could not remember them. Only after several days did their faces begin to look familiar. Much with the help of therapy, my legs grew stronger after months of disuse. I was able to walk with crutches, and in a little over a year, I could walk almost normally. Even now, I wonder about the others that escaped that night, where they are, what they're doing. They may still be out there, wild, their mutilated bodies craving meat. I wonder about the security camera footage and where it is now. Sometimes I imagine it is on the dark corners of the internet, where criminals lurk and prey for their twisted enjoyment. If you come across footage of someone who is chained up, starved, and mutilated beyond human recognition, you will know the horrors of the animal experiment. To this day, my life has gone almost back to normal, but it will never, ever be the same. Not really. In the daylight, I lead an ordinary life. I laugh and I cry. I spend time with my friends, I talk with my family. But sometimes, when I look at them just right, my stomach hurts, my mouth waters, and a near-forgotten sensation washes over me. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that 2-part series compiled into one. Please, of course, do let me know down below in the comments. Of course, please do like and share. If you haven't subscribed to the DMT family, smash that subscribe button and tickle the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT content. Hope you guys are having a fantastic weekend. And remember, above all, be safe, not sorry.